Hello, and welcome to today's live session, number 3.1, the first live session for Course 3 and the Marketing Analytics edX series. Welcome to today's broadcast. It's wonderful that you're here. So far, we've been very pleased with the way the course is going. Overall, for courses 1, 2, and 3, for the four-course series, we now have more than 32,500 students. So welcome to all to all 32,500 of you. So what we do, if this is your first live session, is we will look at questions that have been submitted to us in the live session Q&A forum, as well as look at all the other discussion forums and see what kind of questions you're asking. And then from time to time, we'll do these live sessions where we answer them live. What I primarily do is take the questions that have been asked so far and answer those. And as we get additional questions coming in, we'll answer those as well. So far, today has been remarkable in that we have at least 20 sheets of questions. My goodness, I'm going to do my best to go through them all, but it's quite a book of questions that we have here. So you'll see me going through this list, this rather formidable list of questions. It goes on page after page after page after page. So we'll be going over this today. And again, if you have additional questions, go ahead and put them in. As I'm doing this, I'm actually reading off the questions. I'm answering them in real time. And in front of me, I actually have a monitor where I can see incoming questions come in the chat window. In addition to myself, we also have Jim Mukherjee. Jim, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm also helping out Stefan on this live session, and I'll try and also chime in and answer some of the questions when appropriate.
Thank you, Jim. Ordinarily, we would have Yulia here, the other course facilitator. She was not able to make it today. So with that, on to the first question. Again, we have many questions, so I'll go through them as efficiently as possible. Question number one. Why is competitive analysis required, and when should it be conducted? What are the best sources for the competitive information? All right, great question. So competitive analysis, that's all in chapter 4 in the book. So if you haven't already got it, you definitely want to get a copy of the recommended book for the class, Marketing Analytics, Strategic Models and Metrics. It's available on Amazon.com at a very reasonable price, much less than traditional textbooks, and it's filled with 498 pages of knowledge that you'll use in all 4 of the Marketing Analytics edX courses. So in chapter 4, we talk about competitive analysis. When is it required? Why would you do it? You're doing it so that you're keeping abreast of what competitors might be doing in the future. You do not want to find yourself in the position of a company such as GoPro, such as American Airlines, such as United Airlines. All of those companies were surprised when all of a sudden competitors came in and just took away a lot of their market share. One example being in the 1990s when Southwest Airlines first came to be. American and United were so busy fighting with each other, doing a rivalry, that they pretty much ignored Southwest Airlines. And that was a big problem. Now American Airlines is bankrupt, and United Airlines, they're still viable, but both companies are shells of what they used to be. And again, had they been doing a better job doing competitive analysis, they would not be in the situation they're in now. When should it be conducted? I would say it should be conducted all the time. I would say at least once a year, companies should do some kind of a full-blown competitive analysis where they look at all the various competitors, both principal, direct, and indirect. And I'm going to talk about indirect a little bit later because that was one of the questions. Good question is sources for competitive information. And what you'll find is that every industry has its own best sources. I'd say in addition to that, every analyst has their own best sources. What I did was I went to one organization. They're called Primary Intelligence. Its URL is primary-intel.com. I'm not affiliated with them. And they answer the same questions. What are some great competitive intelligence sources that many people don't use? So obviously many people will go to your competitors' websites and so forth. But here's some that you might not have thought about. Number one is the competitor's annual report. So not just the nice glossy, very nicely printed annual report that most people get, but I would also say the 10K financial documents. In the United States, that section is governed by an organization called the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. That being said, most governments have some kind of ministry or agency or organization that handles equity trading. Different markets, there's the DAX market, there's the Nikkei market in Japan. Many different countries have different markets, and those are governed over by those agencies. And each one of those agencies require some type of annual reporting just to make sure that market remains solvent. So in those countries where you're required to report, which is most countries, those reports are useful. Number two is press releases and announcements. It's actually a very clever addition to the list. I know I found myself using competitors' press releases. I'm always amazed at the kind of information companies will put in their press releases. I guess a lot of them like to brag about what a great job their company's doing, and so they'll actually put in there, oh yeah, we're going to hire a new VP of marketing or a new VP of channels to take care of our new division. And that should already tell you, oh my goodness, there's going to be a new division big enough where we need to hire a new executive. So that should be a big yellow flag to you that this is something big that's about to happen. I'd say for you, if your company is putting out a press release, you'll definitely want to read it first to make sure that you're not putting out this type of teaser information. Number three, if you are dealing with small businesses, so you are in a small business and other people are in a small business as well, this primary-intel.com also recommends going to local planning commissions, and I would agree with that. A lot of times, if a company is planning to expand, they need to get a permit from the local planning commission, and you can find out what your competitor is about to do. Number four, local news agencies. So certainly going to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, all those big news agencies, that's fine. What we're saying is don't stop there. Go to the local news. So this might be an actual physical printed newspaper. That's pretty rare though. Most of the times it's some sort of a local news organization or local news agency to find out where they might have branch offices and what they might be doing. Number five is trade shows. So trade shows are a great way to see what the next big thing they're going to announce is. A lot of companies wait for trade shows or events like CES to announce the next big thing. And that will at least make sure that you're abreast of the current things that are going on. Number 6 would be agencies that monitor the environment. In the United States, the agency that monitors the environment is the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. Many companies, many countries rather, need to have environmental awareness. And so in order to monitor that, we have some kind of an overlooking agencies. In the US's case, the EPA. Whenever we come up with a new product or a new service or a new branch or a new building, we have to fill out what's called compliance reports. And so by looking at those compliance reports, we can see, hey, what do competitors plan to do? Number 7, many countries, again, including the United States and the UK and most of Europe and big parts of Asia, have patent and trademark offices. And we can keep a vigilance on those to see what companies are patenting. For example, many analysts will follow the patents that Apple puts in to the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And that can be very useful to see what things are going to be looking at next. And we'll give suggestions about what the new products are going to be like. I'm going to go on, just wrap up the remaining ones. One is trade journals. So if you're involved in a trade association, a lot of those have trade journals with good information. Court records are another good one. We can look to see what's happening if lawsuits are involved within your competitors. Those have to be filed by law in a public record in the court system. Those can be interesting. One of the things I'm seeing more and more, not just in the United States, but in many other companies, is people using the internet to complain about their work. So one popular example is Glassdoor.com. I don't mean to pick on them, but they're just a big example. So Glassdoor.com has many companies in there, not just in the US, but abroad. And in there, a lot of employees will say things about what that company's like, and spend some time. I recommend spending some time on Glassdoor, and you'll be amazed what kind of insider information you can get by reading that. You know, who reports to whom, what some of the problems are, what some of the rumors are. Yeah, I recommend it. Speaking of people talking in the public, looking at social media can be another way to find out what's going on at a company. One of the things that a lot of companies do is have their senior leadership post items on Twitter or Facebook. And those, of course, are good to look at. Sometimes they're carefully filtered before they go out, but a lot of times they aren't. So you can get some good intel that way. Those are some good ones. There's more. Certainly I recommend reading the book to find out more, but even if you Google what are some good sources of competitive information, that's a good one. All right, on to question number 2. Can you explain indirect competition and which competitors are principal competitors? All right, so there's 3 types of competitors: direct, indirect, and principal. Direct competitors are people with products or services that are very similar to what you have to offer. Indirect competitors are also competitors, but the products or services might not be all that similar. They'll do the same job. So for example, a bicycle would be an indirect competitor to an automobile. Yes, you can transport yourself that way, but it's not always going to be a great substitute. Then a principal competitor is a substitute of the direct competitor in that it's not just a direct product or service, it's something that really worries you. A principal competitor is one that you're actively focusing on, that you're studying at a regular basis. Really need to keep track of all three. And so the question is not who do I look at, but rather when do I look at them? I recommend keeping vigil on principal competitors pretty much every day, at least once a week. On direct competitors that are non-principal, maybe once a month. And then for indirect competitors, at least do some kind of competitive analysis once a year, just so you can keep tabs on what's going on. Question 3, when does it make sense to use R over MS Excel for regression analysis? Another good question. What we find is that for when to use, I'd say for R, which is a statistical programming language instead of Excel. Certainly when the data is not very well structured, we can use R. Excel is great in that it's a very structured flat file, but we're not always blessed with structured flat files. We just have a bunch of numbers. And when you have a bunch of numbers, R works out better. R is also useful when the data is an ongoing stream. You keep doing the same exercise week in and week out. R works out well. If it's just a one-time thing, Excel is fine. But if it goes on every week, then you want to use R. I would say also when fairly advanced analysis needs to be done, or where the data set is very, very large, R is a better bet. Let's see, what are some other things? I would say also, in all fairness of Excel, different versions of Excel have different limits. Which ones have which limits? You know what, there's so many different versions of Excel out there. 2003, 2007, 2010, 2013, 2016, 2017. Every single one has a different limit in terms of what the file size can be, how many rows it can accommodate. Also, Windows versions are different from Mac versions. I can't possibly list them out all here in this Q&A session. Your best bet is to go to the Office support for Windows, and then just Google in, what's that limit for your particular version. But there's sometimes where Excel wins. So when does Excel pose a more relevant tool than R? It wins when we have a situation where maybe you're just getting started and you really don't know R yet. Feel free to use Excel until you really get up to speed on R. The biggest reason, though, is when you work in an industry where pretty much everyone uses Excel. If everyone uses Excel and you're passing around R data sets, they really won't know what to do with those data sets. So in cases like that, I think using Excel is totally warranted. And then in this, in the courses 3 and 4 of the 4-course series with edX, we start to use a little bit of R. And I see R being used more and more in industry. Question 4, can you give an example of application of QSPM model in real life? Yeah, absolutely. So the QSPM, that's the quantitative strategic planning model. And what it does basically is it allows people to make decisions in a very structured way. We're able to capture all of the various stakeholders and different points of view in one model and make a decision based on that. We'll look at the weights of the points of view of different stakeholders. We'll look at the values that are associated with different alternatives. From that, we arrive at an overall attractiveness score to look at different alternatives for the same decision, and then we can make a decision. The reason why QSPM is so well recommended, at least by me, is because if you're in a large company with many different stakeholders, we'll find that these different stakeholders all want to be heard. It's called social justice. And in order for that to happen, we need a tool that reflects all their points of view. And the QSPM matrix is a great tool to make that. So again, if you are in a large company or a very political company or a company with many, many different stakeholders and many, many different points of view, where a lot of discussion happens before decisions are made, I enthusiastically endorse the QSPM model. And that's in chapter 5 in the marketing analytics book. And there's actually worked out examples in there for how to do it. More information in case you want to know more about that. Question number 5, how can SWOT analysis be simplified? So SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And in the book and in the course, I advocate away from the way I see a lot of SWOT analyses are done. A lot of SWOT analyses I see are, hey, I'm company A, I have company B as a competitor, company A has all these fantastic strengths, company B has all these terrible weaknesses, and company A is clearly superior. I don't find SWOTs like that particularly compelling, because why even do them? I mean, if you're just acknowledging that your company's better, just say your company's better. Instead, what I like to do is I like to separate the table out with one section called strengths and weaknesses, and the other section being opportunities and threats. For strengths and weaknesses, I like to look at each section in the org chart. So finance, management, engineering for product, pricing, the promotion team, the support team, operations team, the people that are doing up different market segments. I like to look at all of those different sections, see what they're doing right, see what they're doing wrong, use some kind of a rating system, maybe 1 through 5, to see which ones are doing it very, very well and which ones aren't doing it very well, and then rate our own company, and then rate the same characteristics of competitors in as fair and just a manner as we can, trying to be relatively indifferent. And then when it comes to opportunities and threats, I like to look at short-term opportunities and short-term threats, as well as long-term opportunities and threats. And what's nice about that is we might see some quick wins through short-term, but we might see a longer-term direction that we can begin to focus on. Again, for examples, that's all in chapter 5 in the book, and there's sections on the course as well that talk about how to set up a SWOT. Question 6, can you explain when Monte Carlo simulation model should be applied, and how can Excel be used for the simulation? Great question. What I did was I Googled I Googled Excel add-in Monte Carlo simulation, and I got 664,000 results. So suffice it to say, there's a lot of add-ins out there for Excel that'll do Monte Carlo simulation. I'm just gonna, again, I don't have any financial affiliation with any of these. I'm just gonna shout out some examples that I saw. I've seen At Risk. I see them a lot. I mentioned them in the book. Basically, the way these work is you'll run an Excel spreadsheet. You'll get this download, which is an add-in. You'll run it in conjunction with Excel, and it'll do the Monte Carlo statistical analysis or probabilistic analysis. So At Risk is one. Many universities like Wabash universities, they'll have created one. YouTube has dozens and dozens of different add-ins you can look at. There's RiskAmp at riskamp.com. They have one. Solver, the company called Frontline, they created Solver for Microsoft Excel. They've also created an add-in for Monte Carlo. Suffice it to say that many, many, many alternatives exist. Which one is the best? It really depends on your needs, whichever one you find most relevant to what you have to do. Jim, have you found any particularly good Monte Carlo simulations for Excel?
Well, there's a at-risk program from Palisade Corporation. I thought that was fairly useful. And of course, there's Crystal Ball from Oracle Corporation.
Thank you, Jim. Those are two certainly big ones. Again, I can't really say which one's best. I would say they're both very, very good. And then use your own unique situation to establish which one you find the most useful. Question number 7, why are perceptual maps useful? So that's another great question. Perceptual maps, we talked about in chapter 3 in the book, when we look at segmentation. And in chapter 3, we show various perceptual maps. It's also content in the edX platform. And a perceptual map will show how close different companies are to each other and certain key attributes. These key attributes represent decision criteria that companies make. So a consumer might say, well, I want to get, for example, in the book I talk about household blenders. I want to buy a blender. Well, how am I going to decide which blender to get? I would say within a certain price point, people look at various decision criteria. One magazine, Consumer Reports, did a study on household blenders. They found that people really look at power and the number of features when they decide on a blender. So what we could do is we could actually run a survey of a number of different blenders. We could see how they rate on all the different attributes of power and number of features, and then plot them on this perceptual map. We then interpret the perceptual map by saying, hey, company A is really near company Y on this perceptual map, which tells us that consumers perceive us pretty much the same. And that's a problem because we don't want to be perceived all the same. We don't want to be perceived as being identical to every other one, because if we are, then people will start to shop on price and they won't acknowledge the additional value that our particular company provides. So I do like perceptual maps because they show you what consumers actually think about your company, how they perceive it relative to other competitors, and it even suggests ways to move. So for example, if you're right next to another competitor on a perceptual map, you might decide, I'm going to add more power or more features. And you can decide which one to add because you'll know, well, one of those will put me farther away from a competitor and allow me to be more differentiated. Of course, when using perceptual maps, we want to make sure that we look at what the market wants in addition to how they perceive competitors. I'm going to go to question 8. Can you discuss the difference between targeting a segment and positioning? Sure, absolutely. So that's in chapter 3. Targeting and positioning, that's part of STP, segmentation, targeting, positioning. In step 1, which is segmenting, we take a vast, broad market, and then we break that up into individual markets called segments that might have some unique element. And the previous live session and the other course, for those of you who went from courses 1 to 2 to 3, We talked about coffee as one industry that has a lot of segments. I don't know if you ever spent time at a coffee shop. I had a client who ran a cafe. I just stayed there the entire day just to see who the segments were. You have your group of people. They like to come here at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. You know, construction workers, people that work on financial markets, people are up really, really early. They have certain wants and desires. Then comes the people that come in around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning. Again, also kind of early risers, but very different kind of a crew. And you have people that come in around 8 or 9. And then you have people coming in maybe 12 o'clock or later. Each one of those represents a very different kind of group with very different kinds of needs. Jim, what do you ever hang out in coffee shops? Do you see different segments, and what segment would you put yourself in? Or maybe you like tea. Maybe you have a tea segment.
Now, I do go to Starbucks here in my neighborhood, but I see early in the morning other folks who are rushing off to work and want to quickly get a cup of coffee. I see them checking up on their emails and wondering what to do next that's on the schedule. But later in the day, I see a different segment of people who probably just want to have a chat or decide where they want to travel next. So I definitely see various categories of people coming throughout the day.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jim. And I definitely see that as well. And again, we need to respond to those different segments differently. So we mentioned Starbucks. So let's just pick on Starbucks. Starbucks acknowledges we have many, many different segments. People come in different times of the day with different wants and needs. Starbucks can then say, okay, here's all the different segments. We have a 4:30 a.m. segment, a 6 a.m. segment, an 8 a.m. segment, a noontime segment, maybe a 2:30 segment. Maybe there's one in the evening as well. For whatever reason, Starbucks only considers targeting the people that like to come in the morning and the early afternoon. A lot of Starbucks I go to are closed at 4 o'clock and beyond, which I always find bizarre. So for whatever reason, Starbucks has decided that in most of their stores to mainly target morning people and early afternoon people. In general, it's decided not to target people that like to have coffee in the evening. Could they do that? Of course they could do that. They already have the stores, they already have the machines, they have trained baristas. They just choose not to. So targeting is a choice. Once you've established who the segments are, you can decide which segments you want to target. Having decided what the segments are and which of those segments to target, then you have to say, how do we want to position our offerings toward those segments? In the case of Starbucks, they say we are the place that not just offers coffee, we offer an environment to drink that coffee in. So you'll see many people look at their local Starbucks. So when Jim said Starbucks, he said it's the local Starbucks because it's in his neighborhood. It's nearby. A big way Starbucks positions their brands is by being nearby. It's the local cafe. So it's positioned almost like an Italian coffee house where you would just go to the local cafe. So there they position it. I remember some early positioning statements calling Starbucks the third home. You'd have your residence, your first home. You'd have your workplace, that'd be the second home. And then there'd be Starbucks, that'd be the third home. By positioning it as the third home, it gives people a sense of space. It gives people a sense of belonging. It gives people a sense of saying, hey, here's where I'm going to meet my friends. I'll talk about things with them. I'll have, we'll break bread and have some coffee and enjoy a nice conversation. So that's segmentation, targeting, and positioning. I'm getting some more questions in here. I'm getting questions beyond this course, which is course 3. I'm getting questions for courses 1 and 2. Want to go over those since we have a few extra minutes. It would be very useful to hear about some examples as to what key metrics or KPIs, key performance indicators, are used to measure effectiveness of the marketing strategy. Great question. I'm going to go over that. So, of course, every industry, indeed every company, is going to have its own idea about what metrics it should track that will most benefit that company or industry. That being said, there are some metrics that many companies track. Here's one article I'm looking for from a place called impactbnd.com, which is a marketing agency, and they help clients establish their KPIs. Here's what they had to say. The 10 most important marketing KPIs you should be tracking, according to the article. Number 1, sales revenue. Not surprisingly, a lot of marketers are measured on their ability to drive revenue. And so we can look, whether we look at total sales for the month or for the year, for the product, for the segment, revenue is almost always going to be number 1. Some companies don't use actual revenue, meaning dollars of items. Some companies choose to use some kind of a proxy. It could be the number of units that they sell, the amount of orders they get, the shipments they produce. But in the end, it's still all revenue. It just hasn't been converted to dollars or euros or drachma yet. Number 2, cost per lead. So this sometimes cost per lead is called CAC, customer acquisition costs. But it always says, how much money do we spend to get a new customer, or at least a new interested party that could become a customer later? One of the reasons why a lot of companies like Starbucks, like Southwest Airlines, have loyalty programs is so that you'll come back again and again. Jim, how many times do you go to your local Starbucks? Are you a pretty regular customer there?
Yeah, just about 3 or 4 times a week, but mostly later in the day, not early in the morning.
And then what do you think Starbucks does in order to get you to come there more often?
Well, they usually have, other than coffee, they usually have some other kind of food available as well, snacks. And so that's something that I've seen them change periodically to see which one is more appealing. And that gets me there. One of the reasons why I go to Starbucks as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. So certainly that initial cost to get a customer, it's very high in many organizations. So the more we can do to continue people's loyalty is good. To that end, the number 3 item that companies track is customer value. In the book, I call that CLV, or customer lifetime value. And it's essentially the amount of money we're going to make from that one customer throughout their entire life. In the case of Starbucks, I know they made a lot of money off of me. I go to Starbucks pretty frequently. Jim, a fair amount as well. Jim, how much are you pretty consistent 4 or 5 times a week? How long have you been doing that for? Years?
Oh, many years. But I'm sure there are others who go far more often than I do. But I find it a good place to meet people and have a chat, or even sometimes discuss some business issues. Excellent.
Thank you for that. So indeed, many different ways to look at customer lifetime value. Number 4 is the inbound marketing ROI. So we look at inbound versus outbound marketing. Inbound marketing says, I'm going to do things that will attract you to me. The leads are coming inbound. So other customers are coming to me to make that happen. So how am I doing that? I'm doing ads, I'm doing search engine optimization, I'm doing other things to bring the customers to me. So that's differentiated from outbound marketing, where I'm calling people. I'm coming to them in order to get things happening. And then the remaining 6 areas will vary depending on the company. One is the traffic to lead ratio, meaning when we look at the website traffic overall, how many of that are just looky-loos and how many of those are actual leads. Number 6 is the lead to customer ratio, meaning of those people that seem to be interested, how many people actually buy that product or service. In the case of a Starbucks, I'm guessing that's pretty high, in that most people who go to a Starbucks actually drink a Starbucks. Number 7, according to the article here, is landing page conversion. So if you have an e-commerce company, of those people who go to the website and fill out the landing page, how many people actually go on to become customers? Number 8 was organic traffic. So how many people come to your website just because of the ads you might put out, or rather the SEO ads you might put out, or maybe they heard about your company. Number 9 is social media traffic and conversion rates. So you might say, hey, I have a Twitter account, I have a Facebook account, I have a LinkedIn, Pinterest, you name it. What kind of traffic am I getting there? And how many people am I converting to customers? And then last but not least, definitely not least, is mobile traffic. So up until now, most of those things have been either in-person visits or traditional computer visits. Now we want to see on a mobile device, what kind of traffic are we getting? What kind of leads are we getting? And more companies are looking at the marketing towards smartphones and other mobile devices. So those are the top 10 ways to measure that. So we'll go on here. Another question here. Got a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. When you are to analyze using cost per point metrics, how could you know your vehicle rating value and what really does it mean? Is it given as an absolute value among all possible vehicles or a relative value to other vehicles or of interest or percentage of a sort of share? Speaking of the example in the lecture, I assume that one vehicle, L versus Vogue, may have various influence levels on audience in different years, so the accurate analysis seems to require accurate vehicle ratings. It would be wonderful if this point can be clarified a bit more. Okay, so what this viewer, what this student is talking about is CPP, or cost per point. So the idea here is we want to advertise something. We want to promote something. Advertising and promotion is not free. So what we want to do is we want to advertise and promote in the most cost-effective way that we can. When we advertise, we get a certain number of people that will be looking at our ad. That's called impressions. And we can actually measure the effectiveness of those impressions using a terminology called a gross rating point, or GRP. And the GRP, we then can say how much is a cost for that. Let me pull up some numbers here. So in the book, we talk about cost of gross rating points by different market areas. As you can imagine, some market areas are more expensive than others. Let's see. So one advertising campaign said, hey, we want to advertise in multiple areas. And how much does it cost to advertise there? What's the cost per point to do that? In 1997, it was $14.68 in Wichita. That same ad was $61.55 in Grand Rapids, $78 in Las Vegas, $105 in Cleveland, $121 in Denver, Colorado, $134 in Dallas, $142 in Seattle, $172 in Phoenix, $180 in Washington, and $550 in Los Angeles. In other words, it's 20 times, give or take, 20 times more expensive to advertise something in Los Angeles than it is in Wichita, Kansas, because the volume of ads in Los Angeles is so much greater. We need to cut through a lot of noise. And of course, those numbers were back in 1997. Things have changed since then. There's a lot more competition for eyeballs, for views. And so now the CPP for Los Angeles market in 1997 was $550. Now it's more than $2,300 for that same type of ad. That's a lot. That's a lot. And so when we bring up the in the lecture and in the book, we do talk about Elle versus Vogue. That has to do with also with what they call cost per point, and also really with the Elle versus Vogue had to do more with target rating points, or TRPs. And the idea there is that we want to only advertise to those people that are relevant. In the Elle versus Vogue example in the book and in the lecture, in this particular case, Vogue found that the people wanted to advertise found the unique attributes of the Vogue readership more relevant than the unique attributes of the Elle readership. Or maybe it was vice versa. I have to look at the thing again, but suffice it to say that Vogue versus Elle, even though they're both fashion magazines, they target different types of people, and one will be more effective at reaching those particular type of people than another one. So if you're looking for, I want to see only women that live in the South, that's one kind of TRP, versus I want to contact only men that live in the North. That's a very different kind of TRP. Different vehicles, such as magazines, will have different effectiveness ratings or costs per point to reach different audiences. How do you find that out? And I think that's what this reader is asking. How do you find that out? That's actually published in something called a masthead. In the old days, I guess magazines and newspapers, they used to have a big printed area in the magazine that was at the top, and I guess it looked like the masthead of a ship. And so they called it the masthead. And then that had all the information about that particular magazine's intended market. Now, of course, it's all done online. If you actually went to Vogue.com or Elle.com and you clicked on promotion or advertising, whatever it is they called their advertising section, all that type of masthead information would be given there. It would tell you what the circulation was. It would tell you the type of person that buys and reads that magazine. Are they college educated? How much college do they have? What kind of jobs they have? Questions like that will give you a sense of what the readership of the magazine is. How do they get that information? They do a lot of surveys. You know, they'll do surveys. They'll do outreach programs from time to time to look at their readership, mainly because they want to make sure that the pieces that they're writing are relevant for that particular type of audience. If they see it change over time, then they'll make changes to the content. And also, advertisers want to know what kind of person is reading their magazine, and they want to show that. So if you go to any of these, you'll see that. Some other data that I got was, let's see here. This was, yeah, so Yeah, so I looked at some information about Chattanooga, which is in Tennessee, and the cost per point for a recent ad was $238.10. So that's the media cost per GRP. So now you know. Anyway, so this is something that that particular vehicle, a radio, a TV, a magazine, whatever, they would tell you what that is. And then the question is, what is good? It depends on you. I mean, you have to look at your budget and the kind of people that you're targeting. It might be really cheap to advertise in Wichita, Kansas, but if none of your customers are in Wichita, Kansas, it would just be wasted money. It might be expensive to advertise in maybe a volatile market or metro like San Francisco or Tokyo or Paris. But if that's where all your customers are, then so be it. You're going to have to pay that money. As you do advertising, you'll likely work with a person called a media buyer, and he or she will direct you through the various options and let you know what's the best for your area. So there's no real percentage. It's really more a question about what the prevailing cost is in that area. And it's similar for Facebook and Google and so forth. They have the same kind of thing. Although instead of different demographic or geographic areas, a lot of their pricing is based on keyword. So you would spend a certain amount to buy a certain keyword that you'd find relevant. Last question for the day. Number 3, could you talk about Google Trends as a tool for competitive analysis and how exactly it can be used as such? Absolutely. So I'm a big fan of Google Trends. To go there, it's google.com/trends. One example, you could use it. I looked at one article and it said, hey, I work at a bank and I want to know what my competitors are doing. What I can do is I can look at Google Trends, and I can, if you go into google.com/trends, it'll have a search bar at the top. And let's just say you worked at a bank. You might say, I want to know all the trending information or how many times this bank has been mentioned in the last time period, and you'll specify the time period. And here in this article, which is on acute.com, dealt with looking at the number of searches in the past 4 years, which describes interest over time for HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds, and RBS, or Royal Bank of Scotland. So and then we can see the interest over time, and you can see it would show you the plot and the curves going over time to see what the interest level will be. And that helps you, right? That helps you understand how you're being perceived from a competitive analysis standpoint, if your curves are much greater or much less than other companies are. You can also use other Google information tools to find out what's going on with your trend, to see if your particular product or service is trending upward or downward. What competitors are doing, you can search for them. But basically what you do is you put your name and the competitor's name in the Google Trends search box, and it'll tell you the number of searches for you versus your competitor over time. So it's a great way to keep tabs on what's going on. Jim, have you ever used Google Trends for any sort of competitive intelligence, and what have you found?
Yes, yes, I've had a chance to look at Google Trends in the computer industry, but at a higher level to see how server market sales were being perceived in the marketplace for larger companies like Sun, HP, Dell, IBM, etc., and gave us a good feel for who our direct competitors and some of the indirect competitors could be.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. And that we've actually managed to go through the entire list of questions. I think we just barely made it. I think we're at time right now. I'm looking at my chat monitor. I don't see any more additional questions coming in. So with that, we thank you again for being part of the course. We thank Jim for being here. Again, he's one of the course facilitators, and he's going to be one of the people that respond to your questions in the forum. We thank you again for being part of such a successful class. I mean, over 32,500 students. I'm so happy that this edX series has been such a incredible success. We thank everyone here at UC Berkeley Extension that have been helpful for us. Also the good people at MIT for making edX possible. With that, we're going to sign off until the next live session. Thank you again.